Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hi, my name is Clara, and as a child, stories were never simply words on a page. To me, they were entire worlds. I spent most of my childhood jumping from one fantastical adventure to another, living alongside the protagonists. Whether it meant chasing down the Gruffalo or meeting the tiger who came to tea. While the Gruffalo is now resigned to my bookshelf, these stories have remained a source of nostalgia throughout my life and a constant reminder of the joy and the pleasure I derive from reading.
My name is Stella, and when I look back on my childhood, some of my fondest memories come from my parents narrating books to me, doing every character's voice expertly, and bringing any song on paper to life. Mr. Gum, the Robber's Song, was my personal favourite. I remember feeling so accomplished when I read my first series by myself, the Daisy books by Kes Gray. I related to Daisy. I felt like I was gossiping with her when I read. She was telling me all these secrets about her life like she was one of my friends. I remember my mum catching me reading under the duvet by torchlight, way past my bedtime. This joy has lasted me up till now and has shaped my view that reading for pleasure is something that no child should be robbed of experiencing. When I see all the books on my bookshelf, I feel as though they are a part of who I am and have shaped me as a person. Reading for pleasure is about learning who we are, granting us the absolute thrill of recognition and finding community. There is no medium more intimate than a book. You are hearing or feeling someone else's internal weather conditions, a communication from one soul to another. That is true pleasure.
Hi, my name is Anaya, and as a Year 12 student doing A-Level English, I find comfort in reading books which often prove as a source of escapism. Although the A-Level workload is astonishingly heavy, I always ensure to find time to read, enabling me to wind down and find a sense of comfort that isn't my phone. We now have an additional speaker who would like to say a few words.
Hello everyone. My name is Jace Joyce and I'm 6 years old and I'm the author of 3 books and a diverse educational gift box which promotes reading and writing in children when they're still teeny tiny. I support educational organisations in the UK and overseas from the sales of my books. Do you want to all hear a joke? Yes! Where do fish keep their money? In the riverbank. My name is Jace, thank you for having me.
Following on from that, we are now excited to introduce Lee Newman, Alison David, Chris Callaghan and Debbie Hitch while they talk about building a culture of reading for pleasure.
Thank you for joining us, or for still being here at this time of day. I'm Lee Newman, I'm the Education and Children's Publishing Director at Collins, which is a division of HarperCollins Publishers. So I direct all of our educational publishing and our children's fiction and non-fiction books under the Collins Kids, Barrington Stoke and Rocketbird books lists. I'm also chair of the Educational Publishers Council of the Publishers Association, and I'm delighted to be hosting this panel alongside my esteemed colleagues. As you'll have heard throughout today and will hear over the course of the next couple of days, children's attitudes to reading are changing. Despite all of the brilliant children's books published each year, and despite how much our authors, literacy charities, teachers and librarians try and encourage children's reading, we are at something of a crisis. Just 1 in 3 children aged 8 to 18 here in the UK say that they enjoy reading in their free time, which is the lowest reported level since the National Literacy Trust started measuring reading for pleasure back in 2005. This is not unique to England. A widespread decline in reading for pleasure among children and adolescents has been observed by educational researchers across various countries, including France, New Zealand, and in the US, where the percentage of 13-year-olds who read for fun almost every day dropped from 27% in 2012 to 17% in 2020, and from 53% to 42% amongst 9-year-olds in the same period. Well, why is that a problem? Well, firstly, there's a somewhat self-interested reason for publishers that if today's children aren't reading books, they aren't going to become tomorrow's adults buying books. But more importantly, we've heard children's mental health is at a record low in England. They're navigating an underfunded, overwhelmed school system, but their mental health and attainment could be hugely improved by a relatively low-cost, low-threshold activity of reading. We know from our research that reading is a key indicator of a child's future success. When children learn to read at an early age, they have greater general knowledge and a wider range of vocabulary. Their reading is more fluent. They have improved attention spans. And beyond the attainment benefits, we know from HarperCollins' own research that children who read for pleasure feel happier, less stressed, they concentrate better, are more resilient and more empathetic. As you'll gather, I feel passionately about this because I've spent my publishing career working on education resources, particularly in primary reading, and as a school governor for a decade, I've seen firsthand the power that books have to narrow the disadvantage gap, with the impact of reading for pleasure on progress in English and maths being 4 times greater than the impact of having a parent with a degree. I'm living proof of that since neither of my parents had a degree, but voracious reading is what got me good grades into this university and gave me the resilience and self-esteem to thrive at Oxford. So that's the problem statement, but how have we got here, and more importantly, what can we do about it? My fellow panellist Alison asked me recently whether if I were a child in this day and age, would I still be a voracious reader? And my instinct was to say yes, of course, because reading is so intrinsic to my identity, as it will be to many of you. But when I really thought about it, I wasn't so sure. And I think that will be one of the key considerations over these next couple of days. What does it take to raise a reader in 2025? And how can we all amplify that message and make a tangible difference in reversing declining reading rates amongst children? We have an amazing panel lined up to talk to you today. You'll hear their experiences, insights and strategies around reading for pleasure, plus more about the initiatives already underway. So I'd like to ask the panel to introduce themselves. Over to you, Alison.
Hi. Hello everyone. So I'm Alison David. I'm Consumer Insight Director at HarperCollins Children's Books and Farshawe. So we publish children's fiction, non-fiction. We have a very broad range, huge range of books because we're trying to offer something to interest every child, basically. So that's speaking to the importance of choice. I've gone off at a tangent. I need to tell you why I'm sitting here. I've been researching children's reading for pleasure since 2012. I've been following the trends. I've been commissioning research studies, working with families and in the school setting to understand what the barriers are to children wanting to read and how to break those barriers down. So we know that there are solutions, but as Lee says, the crisis is very real. So I'll hand on to Debbie and then...
Thanks very much. Thanks. So my name's Debbie Hicks. I'm delighted to be here today and as a guest of HarperCollins on this panel. So I am the creative director and also founder member of the Reading Agency. If you don't know us, we're a UK charity. We work with libraries, publishers and other partners to empower people of all ages to access the pleasures and the benefits of reading. And we have a special focus on supporting those communities who need those benefits the most. Now, we're absolutely passionate about the proven power of reading to change lives. We know that it builds skills and learning, supports health and well-being, connects communities, and inspires and makes creative people. So that's why the Reading Agency is so determined to raise readers.
Hello and thank you. My name is Chris Callaghan and I'm a children's author. I'm going to talk a little bit more about my background in a little bit, so I'll leave my introduction there.
Okay, so starting with you, Alison, why do you think we're seeing a decline in reading for pleasure over the last few years?
Well, one of the reasons is that from school age, many children really just think of reading as little more than just a subject to learn. You know, it's difficult for many children to learn to read. It's boring. You know, it's a task. It's something that you have to do, and so they think very negatively of it. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is that you can counterbalance that feeling of negativity if you come from a home and a family where reading thrives, you know, where there's enjoyment in reading. But at the same time that children are finding reading difficult and really kind of hard work at school and boring and dull, they're not being read to at home. So we've seen a long-term decline in children being read to. It was really quite shocking. So as I said, I started looking at this in 2012. But to give you an example, back then, 68% of preschoolers were read to every day or nearly every day by their parents. So that means kind of on 4 or more days a week. And that's just plummeted. So just in 2019, that was down to 50%. So 68 down to 50, last year down to 41. So it means that basically fewer than half of our preschool children are being read to frequently. So they're not growing up with that idea of enjoyment and the pleasure in reading. So they're starting school, as we know, with speech and language delay, but more than that, they're also starting school without having any idea that there could be any joy in this. And then what happens? They're taught to read. And the focus at schools is very much... as we know, in education, it's very much instructional, you know, and that is kind of very counter to what reading for pleasure is. I think we need to think about the difference between literacy and reading for pleasure. And they are very entangled, you know, obviously. They're not completely separate, but it just helps, I think, if you think that literacy is a skill that you have to learn, which is what obviously the summit's all about. But reading for pleasure is once you've got that skill, you're choosing to read. And that is where the magic comes, because as Lee said, we know that when children choose to read, that's when they start to do better academically. So I think of them anyway as like two sides of the same coin. But the reality is that schools, education settings are set up to deliver literacy lessons more than anything else, and they don't really have the kind of wherewithal or the knowledge or the experience to treat literacy in the way that it needs to be treated, which is differently. You know, reading for pleasure is not a subject, is it? If you think about it, can you have a reading for pleasure lesson? No, you can't. It's an outcome. Pleasure is a feeling, an outcome. You can share it, but you can't teach it. So it does need a different approach in the classroom, and I think that's why so many children come through school and they just think this is just learning, it's nothing more. They're not being read to at school age either, by the way. So, for example, by the time they're 8 to 10 years old, only 1 in 5 children are being read to by their parents frequently.
So I guess we can't afford to wait until they've developed the skill before we try and build that will. Debbie, what have you observed in attitudes to reading in your work?
Well, I think first of all, I just want to echo what Alison said. You know, reading for pleasure rather than reading for literacy is the important motivator. You know, it's the foundation for a happy, healthy, and prosperous life. And so, you know, that decline then in reading for pleasure in children, but also in adults, we know from research that 50% of adults don't read regularly for enjoyment, is really worrying, because that's going to have an impact on everybody's life. And if we want to break that cycle, we have to treat that as a holistic issue and not just think about children's reading, but think about how we create positive adult reading role models too. So there's some big issues to tackle, but from our work, you know, we see there are some really positive and important trends to build on for what works best in keeping children reading. And a lot of those trends are happening outside of the classroom through community library programs such as the Summer Reading Challenge, which the Reading Agency delivers with public libraries. So that's available in every community across the UK. It's focused on fun and enjoyment. It's driven by choice, and it happens outside the directives of the formal school curriculum in a safe and trusted community space, and it generates an absolute buzz around reading. So it's got an annual theme, It's got incentives for children for every book read, and it's a real highlight for family reading calendars. There's nothing to rival the excitement of Sign Up Saturday at the beginning of the summer holidays when the children go in to sign up for the challenge, or the end of challenge medal ceremony. And 500,000 children take part every year, 13.4 million books are loaned from the library, and 100,000 new children join the library every year. So the Summer Reading Challenge and that community fun activity does build readers. 4 in 5 children taking part said that they read more over the holidays as a result of being part of that programme than before, and 3/4 said they became more confident readers. So there's some really important lessons from programmes like this that we need to build on if we want to create new generations of readers. And there's a sort of pedagogy, I think, emerging around reading for pleasure. Firstly, we've heard this a lot today, children need choice. They need support with choice, but when choice isn't there, reading is a chore. And choice depends on good curation, experimentation, and open access to content. So libraries in schools and communities are absolutely vital to the mix. Interest pathways into reading also work for children that don't see themselves as readers. So starting with the hook, not the book, is the way in to start a whole new set of reading journeys. We've heard this again quite a lot today, but inclusivity is vital. Children need to see themselves and they need to see their lives in the books that they read, and they need accessible content, especially if they've got a particular barriers to reading, such as dyslexia. And I think the other important thing in the mix is activation. Reluctant readers need encouragement and support, incentives and rewards. Summer Reading Challenge, we give away stickers. Stickers just work, and so do medals, and so does book chat, and so does author talk, and so does enrichment activities and shared reading. And I think we also need to better connect reading in the classroom with reading in communities and families. And we need to support that reading with effective reading role models. No bit of the reading ecosystem could do it on its own, but together it can really make a difference. And finally, and most importantly of all, reading has to be fun. It's the magic in the mix. If you start with learning, you kill reading dead. If you start with escapism, adventure, and humour, reading happens by default. And I just wanted to make a very final point about screen versus print, because I think we absolutely have to throw off those traditional definitions of what makes good reading practice. We often hear that screens are the enemy, but it's important to recognise that reading is evolving in different formats and via different access points. And we absolutely need to update conventional definitions of reading to take into account new technologies as well as visual and digital media and the way that's impacting on our new generation of readers. So is it that children are reading less, or is it that they are reading differently? Last year, for example, we saw 800,000 and audiobooks borrowed as part of the Summer Reading Challenge. For the first time, research shows that children enjoy listening to audiobooks more than reading print. And twice as many children who read comics say they enjoy reading than the national average. And finally, video games are providing new opportunities to engage with story and with narrative and with character development. So if we are to build a generation of readers, it's important that we think about reading in new ways, focus on content and not medium, and dismantle those traditional hierarchies.
Completely agree with all of that, Debbie, thank you. And I also love the fact that some things like the Summer Reading Challenge, some families haven't been members of libraries before they take the Summer Reading Challenge, and actually having a reason to go into a library, because all spaces can be intimidating if it's not a space you're used to. It's a good way to take that first step. So coming back to attitudes on reading, Chris, what are your experiences as an author?
Well, one of the real perks of being an author is actually going into schools and visiting the readers themselves, engaging with everybody there. And the word that springs to mind is the word that you mentioned there was buzz. That's what the feedback always is from these kind of events, the buzz that the children feel before the events, and then hopefully the school carries that on after those events as well. And I think sometimes the best author events come from when the schools have planned things in advance. It's not just a one-off day or a one-off hour session. They build up the last few weeks and use the author visit as just one point in the whole structure of a term. Now I know that maybe kind of goes a little bit against the idea of reading for pleasure, but I think if children do just have this fun of reading and the fun is done at school, then hopefully that fun carries on outside of school as well. Virtual events are another good way of doing this, because not every school can afford to have an author in, or some schools might be in places quite remote or just away from where all the other authors are, really. So virtual events are a good way of engaging, although the decline of virtual events is a bit of a shame. I think we've maybe got sick of the whole Zoom pandemic kind of idea, and we're trying to maybe move away from that a little bit. But I think it does open up lots of opportunities for schools that can't afford author visits. And but I would also say anybody who's trying to engage any kind of children, their own children, school children, is get in touch with the authors themselves. Social media, check their websites, get in touch with them. And I think so often so many people are quite surprised when an author does respond to a comment or a question or something, and that just very much increases that connectivity with the reader and the author. And most of us really, really love doing that. If you're going to contact maybe a high-profile author or a celebrity author, less chances of communication there. But in my mind, well, stuff them. Contact somebody who will reply to your messages, because there are so many of us out there. So please, that would be great.
I think we're a bit tight on time, so I think I might just stay with you for a minute, Chris. Can you just tell us a bit about your journey to becoming a reader and an author?
Right, okay. Well, normally when you ask an author about the background, it's a story of books and books and books, libraries, Jane Eyre, The Hobbit. But that's not my story at all, which is probably why I've been asked to talk about this on this panel. I come from a very deprived area, not far away from where Jonathan was talking about earlier on. Very high deprivation where people don't really read much at all. My family didn't read. We didn't have bedtime stories, but don't feel too sorry for me. I come from a very loving, wonderful family. We just didn't read. Bedtime was still a chance to engage and talk to everybody, but it just didn't involve books. And the books that I did read at school were quite often about the more seemed to be well-off children, having those kind of adventures that well-off children kind of have, not from the kind of streets that I grew up in a shipyard town on Tyneside in the north of England. So I just didn't feel connected with the books. Books just didn't seem, for me, it always seemed the more well-off kids that read books, the more well-off, the more cleverer kids that read books as well. So I just felt quite disconnected that books were just not for me. But I've always enjoyed stories, always loved stories, and I always used to write my own stories. One example of that is I used to love Danger Mouse, the TV series, a cartoon about a secret agent mouse who would have lots of crazy adventures. Now this was back in a time before streaming, before DVDs, before even video. So if Danger Mouse was on at 5 o'clock on a Thursday, you watched it then, and you had to wait till 5 o'clock next Thursday to watch it again. So I used to write my own stories. I used to create the stories that I wanted to read because I couldn't find them elsewhere, or at least I didn't think they were out there. So I've always written my own stories, even though I didn't read books. Now, when I got a bit older, one of the most fantastic TV series that I ever saw was Sherlock Holmes Adventures, the Jeremy Brett version from the 1980s. Now, this is kind of what turned me into a reader, because I loved these so much that my parents actually invested in a book of the Sherlock Holmes stories. And not only are they just fantastic stories, but they were short stories, and I think that was very, very crucial. And I distinctly remember the sense of achievement after finish reading a book or finish reading a story and then wanting to read something else, and that was quite addictive. So that's kind of what got me reading. But it wasn't until I was really an adult, when I was in the military, I used to be an aircraft engineer in the military, that I started reading more and more and more, and reading just became part of my life. So much so that when I was thinking about changing careers, I thought about going to university. Now, somebody from my childhood, university wasn't really much of an option, and certainly for somebody who didn't read, but because I was now a reader as an adult, it was an option. And that's what happened. I went to university, I studied environmental science, and I worked in environmental science. And carried on reading, but carried on writing stories as well. And it wasn't until my daughter was born that I actually discovered children's stories for the very first time. And it was wonderful to discover those with my daughter, but it was also with some regret that I didn't get to experience those as a child. So it was reading and writing with my daughter that I wrote a children's story, and I sent it off to a publisher just for a giggle, and they printed it, and it became a book, which led, thank you very much, which led on to me working with Colin's Big Cat and writing lots and lots of short stories. And it's very much in the hope that a child just like me, from the kind of background that I'm from, will pick up one of those stories, enjoy it, and then maybe pick up another story and another story, just like I did with the Sherlock Holmes stories, and hopefully they'll become a reader as well. So that's my story.
Thank you. And I like to think all of those different, those different roles and different things you've done have found their ways into the books along the ways as well, and enriched the stories that you've written for us. So I think you've touched on an important point there about access to books in schools, and that's why it's so important to have high quality authors reading books for schools. What role, Alison, does reading aloud play in encouraging engagement with books?
Well, reading aloud is so powerful. So earlier on we were talking about how children find reading really onerous. It's a task, it's boring, it's a lesson. When you read aloud to a child, it completely changes the atmosphere around it, and it goes from being a task to being a treat. I mean, this happens in the home setting and in the school setting. So, I actually want to give you a really amazing statistic. So, if we think about 5 to 7-year-olds, on average, about 34% of them choose to read themselves. They're just learning to read, they're reading early readers. They choose to read to themselves every day, or nearly every day. Just 34%. That's an average. But if you look at those children who are 5 to 7 whose parents read to them every day, it's 62% of them. For those 5 to 7s whose parents only read to them kind of once a month, rarely or never, only 10% will pick up a book. So that just shows you how incredibly powerful it is. When you read to a child, it motivates them to read independently as well. Now, the very sad thing is, with the work I've done with lots of families, is that many parents think that reading is a bit like learning to ride a bike. Once you've got it, then that's it, job done. And if you've got a busy life, it's quite nice to think, well, I don't need to bother with that anymore. It kind of feels a bit legitimate, I suppose, if you're a busy parent. But children really do need to be read to all the way through primary school years. I mean, as Lee said at the beginning, I think that there are so many distractions now, really. If a child is left to their own kind of devices, they're pretty unlikely to find a reading habit these days, unless they get a lot of help from their parents and from school. So this is how children understand that reading is joyous and is a pleasure, is when they experience it, when they're read to. Now, lots of families aren't doing it, as we know. So how about if children were read to every single day at school? How transformative could that be? We did a piece of research about that a couple of years ago, where we worked with 3,000 children aged 7 to 10, and for just one term we asked the teachers to read aloud to them story time at school, and to see what would happen. Well, I can't go into it in detail now, but I can tell you it was utterly transformative. Children used to cheer when it was story time. How wonderful is that in the classroom? At the end of the study, 77% of them wanted story time to carry on. They didn't want it to stop. And focusing in on year 4, which is 8 to 9-year-olds, I think, their reading age went up on average by 12 months, just by listening to stories through one term, with no agenda, no kind of teaching, no questions, no fear that they would get it wrong. They just relaxed and kind of went with it, and they got totally motivated to read themselves. So there's a big education thing that's needed, I think, that because like I said, lots and lots of families think that it's babyish to read to a child who can read. Absolutely, it's not. They also think that, you know, they don't need to be read to, because if you can read, it means you will choose to read. It really doesn't. So I think that one of the most powerful kind of things we have in our toolkit is reading aloud to children, but doing it frequently. I mean, obviously once a week's better than nothing, but it's when it happens daily that the magic really happens. And so this is one of the most powerful things we have, I think, at our disposal.
I think one of the barriers we often hear is that teachers don't have time themselves to find out about contemporary children's fiction. So Debbie, how can teachers build their knowledge and their critical appreciation of children's fiction?
By reading. No, I think strong reading role models are a real key driver for children's engagement, vital in families, but especially vital in classrooms, especially when there's not a culture of reading at home. So teachers do an amazing job, but it's very pressured and they've got a lot on, and they don't always have the confidence or the knowledge or the time to support children's reading or signpost to choice outside of the curriculum. So that's why the Reading Agency has been working with the Open University to develop a new tool called the Teachers Reading Challenge, which runs alongside the Summer Reading Challenge, and it actually supports teachers in building their knowledge and skill as reading champions. It supports choice, it looks at, it provides book lists and resources, online events, teachers reading badges, and so it's a really useful free online resource, and we're especially delighted to be working with HarperCollins over the next 3 years to really build and enrich this offer for teachers. So I think those sorts of tools are really vital, because teachers have a busy schedule, and we need to give them as much support as we can in helping them navigate the richness of children's reading. And just a very quick word while we're talking about reading champions, let's not forget public libraries. They are the absolute experts in community outreach and engagement and development, and they are facing enormous challenges in the UK with cuts to budgets. So, take libraries out of the mix at our peril is one of the things I would say.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I think that is all we've got time for. As you can see, we all prepared a lot more material about, but I don't think we envisaged effectively being the warm-up act for MC Grammar. So I hope you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. Please join me in thanking our panellists.